Amita from London, England. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening to everyone online and in person. This is what it feels like, sucking a candy in front of 32 people. It's my throat, honest. So, I'm a bit of a jokester, actually. But I can suffer too, So yesterday, I was trying to describe the way I perceive this teaching in a way that makes it whole. And what I mean by that is that when I first studied the text, which actually when I was a layman in India, before I became a monk, it was so confusing. So there was just so many ideas, paticca samuppada, dependent origination, and three characteristics, and this list and that list, and it was right. Well, where does this all fit as a piece? And I think we all have that struggle. But when I came across, and it probably was later, probably through, I'm not sure where I first touched that phrase, maybe through Luang, I'm not sure. But when I came across that phrase, there is the uncreated, the unconditioned, the unoriginated, the unborn, the deathless Nibbana peace. If there were not that, there would be no liberation from birth, old age, sickness, and death. So, that statement is a very positive statement. And then from understanding that that is an indication of direction or indication of possibility, a statement of enlightenment, then after some thinking and talking with Luang Por and others, I could see, okay, then the reason we talk about the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta is basically saying anything that begins and ends is unsatisfactory. And it's unsatisfactory in the sense that it's not the unconditioned. So don't go there. Just don't go there. That's the wrong place. Go there for ice cream and a nice dinner with family and so on, yeah. But don't go there for the unconditioned, because it's conditioned. Once you figure that out, then all the teachings are like around the 5 khandhas. So I just talk about objects. I don't talk about the khandhas, but it's, for me, that's what I mean. It's a short form. The khandhas, the objective experience, can't be where it's at in terms of the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed, which is kind of okay. So then it becomes very easy, in at least knowing the direction. So the word dukkha is used in all kinds of ways. You can have dukkha vedana, which is unpleasant feeling. So I have a itchy throat and I want to cough. You could say it's a dukkha vedana. And then you use dukkha in the word, in the Arya Satya Dhamma, the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, its cause. The cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. But then in the Tilakkhana formulation, in the three characteristic formulation, in Anicca Dukkha Anatta, what we're saying there is that things which begin and end are unsatisfactory, but in terms of the unconditioned, they are not in themselves necessarily unpleasant. So, a lovely reunion at Galilee with friends is, for me, incredibly pleasant. But it's conditioned, right? So don't put all your chips on Galilee retreats, but enjoy it. If it's difficult, then work with it, right? And so and comfort. I like comfort. I'm adjusting my chair more and more. Jean, I'm going up. I'm higher than you now. I have long legs. I like a 17-inch chair. I've been doing this a while. Okay, so I do that. But the unconditioned is not comfort. So comfort is unsatisfactory in that sense. Right? But I'm still into comfort. But I realize that when discomfort comes, when illness comes, old age, sickness, and death, that there is an abiding which is not born and does not die. And that is amazing. That statement to me is just amazing. Not born and not die. Now that isn't an idea of a kind of eternal Viradhammo heaven. Like I will just go on into the next, all of that. No, it's not born and not dying. Unborn. Amatta Dhamma. Right? That's that kind of language, of course, doesn't exist in Canadian culture. I guess it must exist in some, in St. John of the Cross and people like that, you'll find it. But in general, we don't talk in that kind of language. But in India, that kind of talk, moksha, is quite common. People might not understand it, but it's not uncommon. So philosophically and religiously, that idea is strong. It's very strong in India. But when I came across it, I said, now all the rest of it makes sense. Dependent origination. With this, there is that. This being, that comes into being. Without this, there's not that. Dependent origination, which is sankata. It's conditioned. It's formulated. But this realization is asankata. It's not constructed. It's not contingent. Popular misunderstandings of Buddhism will say everything changes. This is my trick question. True or false? And everyone looks at the floor. Everything changes. That's not Buddhism. All that begins, ends. That which has a nature to arise has a nature to cease. With birth there is death. But there is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed. Or it's all dukkha, that we say all the time. But not just kind of beyond our cynicism, but everything is dukkha. No. There is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed, the deathless nibbana, peace. So that for me is terribly important in making of this teaching a whole. And then I can fit in all the lists if I want, but I've forgotten most of them. I used to know them, but it doesn't seem very important now. It did at the time. I can understand paramitas or greed, hatred, and delusion, all the different ways that these teachings are described. But without that transcendent piece, or what I guess it's the spiritual piece as opposed to the psychological piece, Buddhism, it wouldn't really, it would be a kind of nihilism, wouldn't it? Kind of like reading Camus or something like that. It's sort of, it's all bad, it's a really bad place, this world of ours. Birth is suffering, but birth is also opportunity. Human birth is like wonderful. Why? Because we can destroy the planet? No. It's wonderful because we can reflect. I can reflect on my own suffering and my own struggles and difficulties. I can witness, and that capacity to witness and be aware is the great mystery of our human birth, but the great gift also. Like in most monks will say, no more rebirth, I don't want to go to high school again. I can't have that kind of language. I can't bear the thought of it, but that's just a personality. So we're not practicing in some negative way so we don't become a high school student again, with Jane teaching us. It's not a negative, I would say. It's not a negative. It's a positive kind of. It's an affirmation. It's a kind of curiosity. I mean, that language really stimulates my sense of investigation. Really does. So I often. Well, what is it that doesn't change? I often do that, and then you come to the limit, silence. That's it. And so that is a language of inquiry based upon this very, very profound realization that the Buddha has. But then there's real life and all the hassles of our own consciousness and all the things that get triggered in our minds. So the anicca, dukkha, anatta part is trying to give us a sense of witnessing the difficulties of our inner and external world, and try to get language which is no longer caught up in the narratives of personality. In other words, I get upset by something, and then I say, I get caught in a narrative of being upset. Oh, it shouldn't happen this way. Da, 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 da. That's what I mean by personality thinking, or Sakkaya Ditthi. I let go of that kind of thinking. I say, this will change. Let go. Don't grab it. It will change. It's not permanent. It's a kind of reassurance of the position of witness. My mom told me that. Right? It kind of. I forget what year she told me that. She said, "That which comes goes." That's the way she put it. I said, "Oh, Mom, you got it." Yes, that was a good feeling. So as you realize that experience itself is unsatisfactory, that doesn't take you to cynicism and negativity, actually. It takes you to, I think, an appreciation of goodness, but a continued curiosity about that which is beyond good and bad, beyond kamma. At least that's the way my mind works. So I guess I often do this, don't I? I say, so do you have a whole sense of Theravada Buddhism, say? I can't speak to Mahayana. Mahayana has other kinds of ideas. There was a question which asked, could I comment on the methodology of Zen koans? I don't know. I've never had a teacher that did that, so you have to ask. Probably Jim Bedard. He's done that a lot, I think. Anyway, in Theravada Buddhism, if you've studied it, do you have a whole sense? So when you see bits of the teaching, can you see where it fits in? my first teacher, Venerable Bodhisattva in India, he said, if there's something that knocks the foundations of your understanding, then you've got to go back to the foundations and understand and look at that. Why does that not fit? And personally, the way Theravada's presented to me and from my teachers in the texts, I've never found anything that underpins that basic structural wholeness that I use. If it's just bits and pieces, then you can get caught up in a lot of intellectual doubts. But if you see that simple model that Luang Por Dun tells us, the mind going outside is the cause, and the result of the mind going outside is suffering. That's about the khandhas, about believing in permanence or satisfactoriness in that which is not satisfactory, that which is changing, anicca dukkha anatta. The mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind, it's like this, is the path and the end of suffering. Now, that doesn't sound like much when you're overwhelmed by something. So, or not overwhelmed or whatever. But that's where, like Luang Por Sumedho, the last year, he's been teaching every week. It's amazing. Just the amata Dhamma is just kind of flowing out of him, isn't it? And he's constantly saying, trust and awareness, trust and awareness, trust and awareness. Now, this is a man that's been really diligent for 65 years of practice. He's no slack. He's just been so hard working in his practice and his giving. And he's just saying, trust and awareness. Just keeps hammering away at that. And yeah, that's what else can you trust? I mean, trust in sila and trust in your community and things like that. But as a spiritual, trust and awareness. So when that language comes into my mind, and there is something quite difficult that comes up, then that language is the language of refuge. It's like this, trust and awareness, Buddha knowing Dharma, those kinds of things. So that's how I approach it. My first teacher said, if you can't write it, you don't know it. He was a writer. Now, if I can't speak it, I don't know it. So it's a kind of, for me, very interesting teaching, because I often say, well, do you really know what you're talking about? And then it's forced me to really formulate intuitions into hopefully some kind of coherent package. It's very helpful, actually. Very, very helpful. Kind of thing. What do I really know, and how do I look at that? So maybe I could go to these questions. Dear Luang Por, thank you for your teaching. When I investigate the bodily sensation of tension, I encounter deep into a long sit. It tells me it is afraid. Letting go of self is annihilation, which I do not at all consciously believe or want to practice with a part of experience that resists truly letting go of self, being, lifespan attachment to being alive in a way that leads to liberation. Let me see, I don't think I read that well, did I? Okay. It tells me it is afraid. Letting go of self is annihilation, which I do not at all consciously believe. I want to practice with this part of experience that resists truly letting go of self, being, lifespan, attachment to being alive in a way that leads to liberation. What is the proper way to practice with this? And then, could you speak to how the teachings address the deep, core, basic need for a sense of safety within us? So there's similar questions. To the second one, deep core sense of safety would depend on on one's conditioning. So some people might feel safe in the woods and some people might not. Some people might feel safe in a group, some people might not. But I think the underlying question maybe of both of those is around fear. And fear is both superficial and primal. Fear is natural. Fear is necessary. It's a natural phenomenon. But it can certainly mess up our psyches in ways which are very confusing. And my sense of these kinds of deep issues is to let them manifest as they manifest, rather than, I've never been one to kind of digging in things and trying to get them out. I guess, as Nick once said, he said his capacity for suffering was always 100%. I got enough to work with. So I've never been one, I've really got to get in there. And I've always had plenty going on. But perhaps that the fear that is navigable, the fear that we can witness, is the fear that comes into consciousness. The fear which isn't, is too strong. Maybe it just doesn't come into consciousness. So certainly in my struggles with fear, I've always known that when they come into consciousness, at some intuitive level, I know I'm safe. It's not really dangerous. It's not like a bear attacking me or something like that. And I guess that gives me permission then, and everyone else, to allow things to be just as they are, and not to try to fix them or run away from them. But certainly, given a chance, I would often run away from fear. And yet I could be crazy, stupid, brave too. I mean, I was 18, so we do that, don't we, at 18? I could do crazy. I rode a motorbike from Toronto to Florida at the age of 17, 90 cc's in February. Now that's crazy. And yet I was a very fearful person. So there's a kind of mixture. But for me, fear has been the biggest liberator, for sure. For sure, it's been, and perhaps it's the greatest. Just the way I'm constructed is this: there was a lot of fear and social anxiety. So it was always basically, first and foremost, understanding that from the Four Noble Truths, one uses the Four Noble Truths to diagnose the problems. And the problem is suffering. Why am I suffering? And then you look at the books, and the book says attachment to wanting. And then you take the books and you go back to your own existential problem, attachment to wanting. And then your teacher finally says it's about not wanting the fear. Oh, that's what it's saying. Okay. Vibhava tanha. Oh, okay. So it's not the fear, it's the not wanting of the fear. It's a step removed. Oh, okay. So then the teacher says, well, you're just going to have to walk into the fire, give a Dhamma talk. And then you look at the fear. Or, like, in Thailand, they have a lot of fear of ghosts. Thais are very, very kind of fearful of ghosts. They get a lot of ghost stories as kids, I think. So I really wanted to see a ghost. I really did. So I was in one monastery where the abbot's father died, and they had his corpse at the edge of the monastery, raised on a platform so animals couldn't get at it in some way. So I thought, great, I'm going to go out there and face my fear. So I sat kind of right next to the corpse, fell asleep. Nothing happened. No ghost, no fear. No fear. Nothing, really. Give a Dhamma talk in front of 100 people. It's not rational. It's not rational. But then Luang would keep telling me, no, you have to look at Vibhava tanha. this desire to get rid of, that is the problem. And that's the genius of the Four Noble Truths. It's not about the content of our experience, it's about the attachment to the wanting around the content. And that was a difficult lesson. So once I saw that, then I could see, what do I want that I don't have? What do I have that I don't want? Use that kind of mantra. Go to the wanting, look at the wanting. And then I could start to differentiate the kind of visceral feeling of fear and then the resistance to it. And then I could understand welcoming, what welcoming meant. I could understand what metta, in loving kindness towards fear, meant. All that language is just kind of common now, which is great to see. It was not very common when you had to be a warrior. You had to kind of fight Mara and like take on the tigers and things like that. So for both of these questions, I would say, don't try to figure it out. Don't create a problem around it. Don't create a sense of self that you have deep core fear issues. Don't go to all those narratives, but just trust in the way of the spiritual life will present these things when they come up, and trust that you'll have the wisdom and intelligence to allow them to come up when it's appropriate. Otherwise, you can create a sense of like that question. I want to counter deep. It tells me it is afraid letting go of self is annihilation. So that's a perception. To me, it seems that that's a perception after fear. We need to define fears, but for myself, I never really understood where the fear came from. I never had a definition of it. I just knew it was very physical. So I would say to both of these things, trust in the body's intelligence to know and be aware and release these things. Sometimes things are kind of over the top, so you need to feel safe. But I do think we have enough wisdom to do that. So any amount of fear that you can witness and feel in the guts and feel in the heart, and then the body relaxes is very liberating. It's very, very liberating. It's a great source of happiness. But you have to kind of allow it to be there. So I found Yoga Nidra probably is a very powerful posture for the extreme kinds of deep stuff that has come up. And because Yoga Nidra, once you can figure it out, you don't have to do anything. You're held. You're held by the floor or whatever. And there is a sense of not having to do it. Don't do anything. Because this energy you don't have to do anything with it. It's there. Right? You don't have to fix it. You don't have to get rid of it. But you do have to witness it. And I would say endure it. So then the mind, of course, the desire mind wants to fix it, wants to analyze it, wants to find a solution, or usually doesn't even go there. It's too difficult. But if you can be with it in Yoga Nidra and just keep letting go, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, then at least my experience, I can't guarantee anything, was that it gets liberated from consciousness. Consciousness is liberated from fear. And a consciousness which is free of fear is very neat. It's very nice. Because it's not a consciousness which is where fearlessness is contingent on environment. If you see what I mean. We can have an environment where there's no fearful inputs and we feel quite safe, and then when the inputs come which are fearful, fear comes up. So this kind of liberation, if you're in Gaza or places like that, I don't know how they deal with fear. No idea how you could do that. But here we are. We have this opportunity. So I would welcome, in a kind of exploratory way, I would say, if you want to be there, let's have a look at you. And I think the more you practice, at least the more I practice, when there is some heavy material which hasn't for some reason comes up, and maybe years into your practice, unexpected, you see it, okay, good, this is a good one. This is purification. Let's have it. Come on, bring it on. But you know, because you know how to do it, and you have confidence and awareness. Yeah? So hope that helps. As I learn more about the Four Noble Truths, I'm less interested in chasing after activities and information, and feel more peaceful and contented. But I am concerned that it may be aversion or depression instead of dispassion. How to distinguish between dispassion and disinterest due to aversion. So dispassion sounds kind of pretty boring, doesn't it? So, I guess it's nibbida in Pali. Well, aversion and depression are full of thought. Cynicism is a very thinking realm. Aversion is like chock-a-block with thinking. Depression is just all thought. So, whereas what we're pointing to in dispassion is like when you're a child and you're given some toy to play with, you think it's fascinating, and then you become a teenager and you're not interested anymore. It's not like you hate the little gun or you hate the doll or whatever. You just, why would I want to do that? So it's a disinterest, but also it's a disinterest in the Buddhist sense, because there is an alternative, and that alternative is joy. Because when the mind is no longer preoccupied with self-thinking, it's available to a pine tree, it's available to a cornflower, it's available to the smile of a child. It has mudita, it has joy. So, and disinterest it is not a kind of absolute. I mean, I'm really interested in art and weaving and color, but I know it's not nibbana. But why not? I'm alive. Must have some fun. Grow up, Viradhammo. So you don't want to make this a kind of wet blanket, deadbeat philosophy, because it won't last. You won't make it. It'll just be so depressing. So you want to bring joy into your life and happiness. But the really joyful part to me is the kind of this curiosity and investigation into what is it that doesn't change, say. That's tremendously energizing and interesting, that statement, and the curiosity that engenders. So these can sound like kind of absolutes of nihilism. No. There's just it's you like you realize that which is anicca dukkha anatta. You're not going to go there. It's not where it's at. Certainly, I guess there is a kind of interim phase of disillusionment with material realm where people search. Sure, yeah, for sure, I was there. So in that realm, there is a kind of desperation or despair in trying to find something. And I suppose if you're stuck at that realm level, then you could get depressed. Because what's the point of it? What's the point of doing anything? But for my own sense was always, there's got to be more. And I kept moving, there's got to be more. And then, okay. So for myself, I had these experiences as a kid, then they became subconscious, but they drove my search. And then in India, as a layman, I read Krishnamurti. And the mind was open for a day. I said, that's it. Next day, the same old garbage was there again. But that was the taste. And then then the recollections on the unconditioned, uncreated, unoriginated, unformed. Yeah, that's the kind of language you could use to talk about that. And love. So It's not a negation of beauty or culture or the sense realm. Would you expand on thinking is personality? I remember I said that. It was a kind of short version of what I mean. Personality is obviously culturally driven, gender driven, all kinds of age driven. So this Viradhammo guy, whose hand I keep seeing move around here, is culturally formed. Being a monk for so long, and refugee parents, and blah blah blah. So all of us have a personal expression, no doubt about that. Your experience of this retreat is different than my experience. Your perception of the Buddha is different than my perception of the Buddha. That's only natural. But when we talk about personality in the Buddhist sense, where it's troublesome is Sakkaya Ditthi, or personality view. And that's the kind of narrative stuff that we get attached to. So not only do I not only is there maybe a tendency of fear in this being coming from whatever kind of conditioning preceded that, not only is there the fear that arises as a part of nature, but then there's the attachment through thinking, and that's a personality. What am I going to do, and why don't they like me, and I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say that. That's what we mean by personality view. And what I was suggesting, can you just notice that thinking is an object which does cease? It's not permanent. And then when it ceases, you might still have the fear. And then you could ask, okay, consciousness is there for sure. Emotion is there. Sure, okay. So is there a third element called me? There is subjectivity, that's consciousness, okay? And there is the emotional whatever. But is there this third element called me? And when I look, it's just silent. There is suchness, and that suchness is subjective, but I can't find this kind of individual person. And yet it somehow operates. But when the thinking mind starts to generate thoughts driven by various things, then the sense of a personality seems very real. If you're really upset about something, and you've really been injured by someone, the thinking mind can really be murderous, can't it? Oh, I'm never going to forgive them. No way I'm going to talk to them again. They deserve to be... Whoa, where's that coming from? But that's not who you are. Is that really a person? Or is it just stuff which is manifested as a sense of self? So that's what I mean by thinking, creating a personality. And if you can then witness the sense of consciousness which isn't furnished by personality thoughts, an unfurnished apartment rather than this one cluttered with self-thinking, what does that feel like? And to try to return to that again and again. So we talk about the gap between thinking, the gap between a sense of a personality coming and going, which isn't the same as trying to get rid of thought. That's a different problem. That's still tanha. How not to fall asleep while doing yoga nidra? Well, of course. You have to invoke Arabika Java Sattva. How else? That's what we have the invocation. Sorry. I don't know, really. I just experimented. First thing, don't use yoga nidra to fall asleep. So it's for. If you use yoga nidra to fall asleep, you won't fall asleep. Or you'll fall asleep and you'll never be able to do yoga nidra, one or the other. So if you want to sleep, roll over on your side. If you want to do yoga nidra, do it when your mind is really bright. Do it when you're restless. Have a cup of coffee. So, whatever, a cup of tea. But don't see it as like resting. See it as inquiry, maybe. So when you've taken the yoga nidra posture, like figure out if you have a day, what time of the day do you have most energy? When are your meditations most energetic? That's when you do Yoga Nidra, if you want to kind of learn about it. And then you lay down in Savasana, and really for me, the insight was around not moving. Just that simple, don't move. And make that a very strong determination, don't move. Because when I talk to people, mostly they've rolled over on their side and fallen asleep. And obviously they weren't aware of that movement because it's so habitual. That then you just redetermine, okay. And if you fall asleep, fine. You will wake up. Or not. But when you wake up, then go back to Yoga Nidra. And then see what happens. But I came across it when I was taking care of Mom, so I was hyper vigilant for about 9 years. So I really needed to do something. And Mom's room was next door, and there's a thin wall, and I was always afraid of her falling down, etc., etc. So I just realized, I got to figure out how to relax this whole system without necessarily falling asleep. So there was a question, what's the difference between meditation and sleep? Some people are still figuring it out. Where did that question go? Both sleep and meditation relax and calm the mind and body. How do you compare the two? Can one replace the other? Well, deep sleep is profoundly restful, isn't it? I mean, it's so restful. Now, the great masters, like Arnprior and Ramana Maharshi, people like that, Nisargadatta, they talk about awareness persisting through waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And there I think it's a case of identity. We are so identified with this sense of a self and the khandhas that it seems that awareness is not there because of our identity with mind and body. I've kind of gotten close to that sometimes, but it's a profound thing anyway. So be careful with sleep. Definitely don't muck about with sleep. Make sure you get a good rest. So some people have found they do Yoga Nidra and then they can't fall asleep. So don't kind of be careful of that. But I have found that I can feel very rested. Like my routine is we have a midday meal at 11, 11:30, and that's the last meal of the day. I have a cup of coffee after, if I don't have to meet guests. Then I do Yoga Nidra for a half an hour, and I don't fall asleep, and I feel really bright. So it's the Arabika Javasata, I think, that's the key to this whole discussion. But I'm just can't. These things, you just have to work with them, try to figure it out. But usually, if you're falling asleep, you're moving, you're rolling over on your side. So make more determinations about not moving. And we still got more time. You got an appointment, anyone? Can you please give more details about the awareness method you describe and Vipassana? In the background of the knowing what I know state, if a thought arises, we just watch it as an object. If thought is an insight into the Dharma, should we nurture it? I.e., in one of suttas mentioned, I would say the language of liberation is silence. Trust in silence. Insights that come up, they'll take care of themselves. They'll come up as reflections, what was that about? But I would say don't get drawn into verbalization, because I think we do too much of that because we're all intellectually inclined and trained to think. So that's the kind of default we usually have, is to think and analyze. But I would say trust in awareness, trust in silence, and see if you can cultivate silence and let that be your guide. Don't try to get rid of thought, but see if you can, because thought is still an object, isn't it? It's still an object. And I use thought, obviously, but I find I use a little bit of thought to bring the mind to silence, or bring the mind to the heart. Not a lot of thought. And then the insights which come from silence they're kind of more from here, from the heart and so on. And then there's 2 more questions. Yeah, I think I'm torturing you here. I will stop there. Okay, I'll offer that for reflection then. Okay, finish with the verses of sharing on page whatever.